Welcome back to another video about prenatal development, and we're also going to go over the birthing process today. Something that is important is that there are maternal factors that influence prenatal development, and something that I'm going to highlight today that is a maternal factor is prenatal care. So prenatal care, when you think about prenatal care, you want to think about visiting hospitals or birthing centers for medical care. The huge thing about prenatal care is that I want to really say and really hone in on that prenatal care is very important for women in poverty. As you know, people that are in poverty, women that are in poverty and are pregnant, they may not be able to have all the necessities that they need in order to be prepared for the baby. So when women go to visit for medical care, birthing centers, hospitals, wherever they get care from, the doctors, nurses, practitioners are able to link them to other social services. So they may give the women resources on where to get baby clothes from or where to get gently used cribs, things like that. All those things are needed to make sure that the baby is being provided with the necessary things needed, where to get diapers from, for example. So women in poverty, prenatal care is very important for them because it helps them to get access to other social services. So we talked about prenatal care, prenatal development, teratogens that influence prenatal development, but now we are finally going to hone in on the birthing process. And if you have no idea about the birthing process, get ready. I'm very excited to share this beautiful process with you. And when I talk about the birthing process, I'm meaning giving birth vaginally. So giving birth, not a C-section, but naturally in terms of, the baby moving through the woman's body and then being born. It's important to note that the birth process occurs in 3 stages. And there are various places where a woman can give birth. She can give birth at home, at a birthing center, in the hospital, even in the car. Sometimes on the way there, people, babies are born. So don't limit yourself to think that babies can only be born in the hospital. There are various places where women can give birth. So we're going to first go over stage 1. And stage 1 is actually the longest of the 3 stages. During stage 1, of course, when a lot of people think about giving birth, they think about contractions. And so as the beginning of stage 1 starts with uterine contractions. At the beginning, contractions are usually 15 to 20 minutes apart at the beginning, and they can last up to a minute each time that it occurs. As we go through the first stage, as the first stage progresses, that is when contractions get closer together. And so they may come every 2 to 5 minutes. So if you always see movies of, a woman going into labor and starting contractions, and they usually have a timer. It's like, all right, we have the time to see how far apart these contractions are. And of course, they're like, well, contractions, yes, we understand what contractions are, but why do women have contractions? And the reason why women have contractions is because when women have contractions, the women's cervix has to stretch and it has to open. Initially, the cervix is closed when a child is is in the mother's womb during prenatal development. But in order for the child to be born, the cervix has to open, so that the entire body of the baby can move through the woman's cervix and eventually be born. When we get to the end of the first birth stage, the woman still has contractions, but the contractions allow for the cervix to now be open at about 4 inches. So we talked about how the cervix is closed originally, but now the cervix is starting to open, and by the end of the first stage, the cervix has to open to about 4 inches. So the baby does a little traveling. The baby travels from the uterus, which is, where they are kept safe, and now the baby is going to the birth canal so that the baby can prepare to be born, and that the mother's body can also continue to prepare for the baby to be born. And this is a picture of what happens, or the mother's womb. And we talked about the umbilical cord here. The umbilical cord is attached to the placenta. And here is the cervix. As you can see, the cervix is close. But at the end of the birth stage, the first birth stage, the cervix opens to about 4 inches. Now we are into the second stage of birth. And that is when the baby's head moves through the cervix. And then ends with the baby's complete emergence. So the second stage, you really want to think about the second stage is when the baby is actually being born. And I want you all to look at this cervical dilation chart. So a lot of times when we talk about the size of the cervix, they will talk about it in regards to centimeters, measuring as centimeters. So you start off as 1 centimeter. That's the size of a Cheerio. And then what has to occur is that the cervix has to be dilated about 10 centimeters so that the baby can be born. And the 10 centimeters is the size of a cantaloupe melon. So imagine giving birth to something the size of a cantaloupe melon. That's huge. So the cervix really has to open up. And after the baby goes through the cervix, after the cervix opens to about 10 centimeters, that is when the baby comes out, and that is when the baby is born. But that is not the end of birth. There's something else that has to occur. The third stage is afterbirth. And afterbirth is when the placenta, the umbilical cord, all the other membranes that are attached, that were attached to the baby, have to also come out, because the baby no longer needs to be attached to the placenta via the umbilical cord. So that's why a lot of times when you see movies, they'll ask the parents, do you want to cut the umbilical cord? The child no longer needs the umbilical cord and the placenta to gain nutrients. Now the mother is going to provide nutrients, whether that is breastfeeding or whether that is using formula milk. But that is important because the afterbirth has to come out, because there is no longer a function for the afterbirth. The last part of this slideshow, or this PowerPoint presentation, I do want you all to understand and realize that doctors are not the only people who can assist in giving birth and assist women in giving birth. Something that, or some people that are often overlooked are midwives. Midwives are really helpful when when births are at low risk. So women don't have a high risk pregnancy, and are able to pretty much just have it naturally or however they choose to. Midwives are perfect for those low risk pregnancies. And in a recent study, according to this review, when midwives gave care, they were able to reduce procedures during labor, and the mothers were also very satisfied with the care. So midwives are important. They are an alternative to having a doctor or a nurse assist you with the birth. All right, I'm going to see you all on the next video. We're going to find out what happens after the baby is born.